I have a confession to make. It may not be obvious, but I am an educational psychologist. I'm one of those people who studies motivation and learning. And you wouldn't necessarily recognize me based on my location behind this cow the last time I was out collecting data. But indeed, I am an educational psychologist. And the reason why you can't recognize that is because I am undercover in wide open spaces. Let me explain. The deal is this. Educational psychologists, they typically work with learning. They work in schools. They work in schools where attendance is mandatory. They work in places where there's walls, where the content of the material we want people to learn is controlled, where we know if a learner is successful based on their achievements that are measured by mandated markers. They are monitored by teachers, principals, school districts, states, the nation, and sometimes even internationally. That's where educational psychologists are most comfortable. But sometimes we break out of schools. Sometimes we work in more free-range places like museums. And the educational psychologists who work there, they're interested in learning too. However, attendance at a museum is not mandatory, it's voluntary. People can walk in and look at whatever they'd like, or walk past whatever they'd like. The content may be controlled maybe by the people who run the museums, but there's no mandated achievement markers. There's also then, therefore, nobody who mandates what it is that people are actually supposed to learn at the museum. And then that makes it very challenging for people like me, educational psychologists, to study what actually happens there. And when we try, it turns out that the learning that happens at museums is pretty grim. So that's that. But then you look at me, I work with people who drive along wide open roads. What am I thinking? The content of what happens out there is wide open. People don't necessarily even drive with the intent to learn. There are no mandated achievement markers beyond driving safely, and the only monitors of those markers are, do you know? Officers friendly. But really what the research in this kind of space is about opening people's eyes. It's about opening their eyes to the environment and creating these powerful experiences for them that ultimately opens up their minds and makes the world bigger for them. And that they come to understand that they're part of a world that they otherwise may not have been aware that they were part of. And that means that we are interested in this research to look at what kinds of potential opportunities lie out there along the open road as opposed to controlled opportunities. We're interested in what kinds of experiences can people have out there on the open road as opposed to what kinds of achievements can they make. And we're also interested in looking at how the place that you're in matters to the way you look at the world. So how do you come to understand this kind of thing if you're an educational psychologist? Well, you do research. And what is research about? It's about what we know. It's about how we know it. It is about why we should care and what we should do about it. And it typically builds on the shoulders of others who have gone before us, trying to expand our understanding of the world. So to set the stage for our research in this open word and what the open road experience is really all about, the research we do is looking at travelers in moving vehicles, in wide open spaces along the roads, in spaces like Canada, Alaska, and because of funding purposes in Norway. And what we're looking at is what is it that interests people and makes them actually stop and get to see and experience what's around them in these wide open spaces. Now, what do we already know about experiences in those kinds of spaces, building on the shoulders of others? Almost nothing. But why should we care? Because the road offers a front row window seat to the place and the people and the cultures of the world around us. And yet once we buckle up and head into our cars, we speed through that environment with tremendous pace. We're in our little microclimates where people can regulate the weather. Want it cool, want it breezy, want it warm. We travel for our own reasons. We think our own thoughts. We might be thinking about where we are. We might be thinking about something completely different. We might be listening to the radio. We might be listening to our self-chosen music. We might be playing games. We might be singing. And in the process, we miss a lot. What if we could penetrate that? What could we accomplish? We could meet people like this guy here. We could engage people in the place where they are at, so that the people come to know the people, the place, the culture of where they're driving through and engage them. And that's about more than just learning. That's about experiencing. We want to know what it's like to think or feel differently. We want to know what it's like to create new positive feelings about other people, other places, other cultures. We want to know what it's like to get people to care. Because if reflected upon or guided well, Learning can evolve from these experiences, and that's the kind of thing that enriches our life. That's the kind of thing that contributes to well-being, and that's the kind of thing that builds bridges among people and cultures. So before we can use research to determine what people could or should experience in open road travel, we have to know what it is that they're currently experiencing. Enter research. So this research is about how we come to know things, and for that you need to have a research question. In our case, it's about how people become interested and engaged in the environment around them. And we use, here you see the materials that we use. We're using questionnaires, observations. We're using credit cards and bags, umbrellas and chairs. We also are in the environment of the wide open spaces as opposed to in the comfort of a laboratory. And we're traveling with researchers both in Alaska, Canada, and in Norway who are all bringing their skills to the road to help us figure out what's happening out there. And what are we going to do with all of this? Well, we're developing better materials to understand how people experience the open road. We're developing an understanding of how you can compare what happens in Canada and the United States with what happens in Norway and how we can make those experiences richer so that we can meet people like this who help us stop, care about what's happening on the road, alongside the road and in the towns along the way, and determine how this can perhaps be interesting to people who work in departments of transportation, who work with tourism, who work with cultural interpretation. And I hope that this research one day touches your life. I hope that when you're driving along the open road one day, something interesting is going to be created for you there that's going to make you stop. And we hope that by engaging people like these young people here who are collecting data in Norway right now and telling about it on Facebook, that you will come to learn more about how this research is done and how it can be meaningful to how all of us experience the open road. And now, after having told you that, I guess I've blown my cover. I am an educational psychologist. I am undercover in wide open spaces, and this is my office.